Well, good morning, good afternoon, and good evening to all of our listeners around the world. My name's Gary Butterworth. I'm coming to you this morning from Voice of America in Washington, D.C. for today's second session in the 50/50 Festival. We're calling this session Making Monitoring Count. So, for those of you not familiar with Voice of America, we're based here in the U.S. capital of Washington. We've been around for 79 years. We currently broadcast news, accurate, objective information in 47 different languages to countries around the world, predominantly those that don't have a long history with a free press, just as we've been doing for the past 79 years. So, on behalf of all of us at VOA, it's really a pleasure to welcome you to this session. Um, Now, as I said, my name's Gary Butterworth, and a fun fact about me, my wife is also a Voice of America employee. In fact, she's a presenter here, and I did that strategically. I like to joke that I married a presenter so that I'd always have someone on hand to do the public speaking duties. Despite a career in media, I've always been a behind the scenes person. I've never really had any desire to speak in front of a group for any particular reason. Well, that was until about 2 years ago when I helped VOA launch the 50/50 project. And over the past 2 years, it's been an incredible journey at VOA. It's been meaningful both personally for our organization and for the media world in general. So for those reasons, it's really my honor, my privilege to host this session today to talk to all of you about some best practices, some lessons learned, and how you can make monitoring count. So I keep talking about the 50/50 project. I'm sure many of you are familiar with that already. But just in case you aren't, let me toss it over to my friend and colleague Nina Goswami at BBC in London, who's really the brains behind this week's festival and one of the world's experts on the 50/50 project. Nina?
Thanks, Gary. World expert. Wow, that's the first time I've been called that. That's fantastic. I'm going to steal that one. Much appreciated. Thank you, Gary, and to everyone at the Voice of America for VOA for holding this session for us today, which, as you mentioned, is part of a festival. Well, we're calling it a festival. It's a series of webinars and events that were taking place over this week. And the idea of each of these sessions is to give us the opportunity to learn from each other about our experiences, not only about around 50/50, but diversity and inclusion generally as well. But before I go into that, I should probably introduce myself properly. I'm Nina Goswami. I'm the BBC's Creative Diversity Lead for News and the 50/50 project. What our particular unit does as Creative Diversity is we look at BBC content and we look at how can we make it more reflective of society? How can we support our content makers in doing that? And of course, 50/50 is a crucial tool in making that happen. 50/50 does have a very close, dear place in my heart, not only because I lead it, of course, but because I'm a journalist. And when I was in the heart of the London newsroom, I would use 50/50 to monitor the content that I was making. And it was in the heart of that London newsroom that 50/50 was born, and it was born as a result of the brainchild of Ros Atkins, who is the presenter of Outside Source, which is a TV news program which goes out on world news as well as domestically at the BBC. This was back in Christmas 2016. He felt that he was getting frustrated that we at the BBC were in this kind of constant state of trying to increase women's representation, and he wanted to do something about it. And that is where 50/50 was born, and why we're doing this session called Making Monitoring Count, because monitoring is at the heart of everything we do. So 50/50 literally is as simple as monitoring the number of men and number of women on our content to see if we can increase women's representation over a set period of time to 50%. That's rule number one, our first core principle. We use data to affect change. The second core principle is that we measure what we control. At the end of the day, we need to be able to make change, and that's why measuring what we control is so important. And number three, we never compromise on quality. At the heart of everything we do is the editorial. Editorial is paramount. And so what we're doing with 50/50 is trying to enrich our storytelling by finding new diverse voices. And so that's the real heart of 50/50 there. But it's enough of me going on about it. We want to hear from other organisations that have been implementing it, hear your best practice. I'm really excited to hear from you all and how 50/50 is playing out in your particular organizations. So thank you again for attending, and Gary, back to you.
Thank you so much, Nina. Really appreciate that. It's a fantastic program, and I think Nina will be sticking around in case we have any questions directed to her. But now let's meet our panel. So not too far from Nina, from Belgium, we have Geertje Bal. She joined us from VRT, the Flemish media organization. Geertje, can you briefly introduce yourself and your media organization?
Thank you, Gary. Well, I'm Geertje Bal from, I work as a journalist at VRT News, and I'm a bit the initiator of the 50. I brought the 50/50. I learned about it from the BBC and I brought it to VRT. And we are, as you said, the Dutch-speaking public broadcaster in Belgium.
That's fantastic. Thank you so much, Geertje. I will have hear more from you in just a moment. But now let me turn next to my Voice of America colleague, Dimitri. Dimitri is actually in our New York office, so we're hearing from our fourth city of the day. Dimitri, can you introduce yourself briefly?
Hi, everyone. I am Dimitri Vashin. I'm a news producer. I'm a line producer. I'm a production coordinator, story producer, fixer, and booker for Voice of America New York Russian Bureau. I have 4 brilliant videographers and 7 brilliant reporters, and I support them with all my heart and all my skill set. I've moved to New York from Hollywood, from California. I worked in Hollywood for some 5 years in the various sides of entertainment industry, in a talent agency, location services. As an independent production company, I did a little bit of aerial video production. And my most notable project I work on was, a little show called Big Little Lies.
A man of many talents. Thank you so much, Dimitri. And last but certainly not least, we have our final panelist, Tone Okiwale Shonaya, joining us from Nigeria, where she works at WFM Radio. Good evening, Tone. How are you doing? And can you introduce yourself very briefly, please? You're still muted. Tone. There you go.
Hi. Thank you very much. I'm good. This is Tone Okiwale Shonaya from Women Radio, Nigeria. Hi.
Thank you so much, Tone. So we'll have a question for you in just one moment, but the 50/50 project started in London, and our closest panelist to London is Geertje in Belgium. So let's start with her. Let's keep it local and then expand worldwide. So Geertje, I was just wondering if you can just give us the brief overview at 50/50 at VRT. How did it start? Is it spreading quickly? And what are your what do you want to say to our panel to really kick things going?
Yeah, well, we started with the 50/50 at VRT now exactly 2 years ago. I learned about the project through at an EBU meeting. EBU is the Organization of Public Broadcasters in Europe and around. And somebody from BBC presented this project, and I immediately went to them to ask about it because I knew that my then editor-in-chief would be very interested. We started very slowly with 2-3 teams. But now we have 11 teams counting, mainly radio and television. We are working on a system, an automated system to do the online counting as well, but it's not finished yet because it's more complicated and a lot more work if you want to count the online output as well. We all teams do it voluntary, although some we speak to them and try to convince them. We have a little working group of 5 people who are really the ambassadors of the project. And it took us a while, but since half a year, we have a couple of teams reaching the 50/50 regularly. But all teams, except one, have increased the number of women they bring in on air.
Very interesting. Thank you, Geertje. And Dimitri, that reminds me of a conversation we had over email not too long ago. If I'm recalling this correctly, I think you were telling me that, well, I know you're based here in the United States, but your audience is predominantly in Russia. And if I remember this correctly, you were saying that news in Russia still tends to be male driven, but you found some innovative ways to incorporate women's stories into your content, largely on the feature side. Did I remember that correctly?
Well, not only in Russia, Gary, in United States, it's a very male-dominant world. I mean, you know, US is a country where, with a history of racial and gender discrimination. I mean, women were not allowed to vote here until 100 years ago. Women were not allowed to run marathon until 50 years ago. And while we're in the process of, you know, making the changes, we have first vice president, who is a woman, who I'm very proud of. But it's still, there's a long way to go. And New York is a city, you know, heavily dominated in the news cycle by business news. And, you know, Wall Street is a men's world, whether we like it or not. That's the reality we're living in. When first 50-50 numbers came back, it was 75 to 25, which was unsurprising, but also shocking. And so we started to look at how we can, this does not represent New York. This is not, you know, what New York is. And we started to look at the ways, you know, to change the dynamics, because as a news, you know, story, you're so limited to the story, you know, as an opposite of a screenwriter, well, you know, all the creative tools at your disposal. And yes, we came up with a certain, you know, segments weekly that just dedicated to women. And yes, a colleague of mine have produced a fantastic documentary last year. It's called Lakota Daughters. It's about the small Native American tribe in South Dakota. And it's a very rough area, place to live. There's a lot of alcohol and substance abuse, and there's no law enforcement present in the reservation. And so little girls tend to disappear. And the story is focused on girls age of 10 to 18. And there's some nonprofits that helps them to develop certain skills, you know, A, to survive in this environment, and B, to succeed in the country where Native Americans don't have much advantage to begin with. And one of the girls, she particularly struck me because she wants to become an Air Force pilot, which is, you know, not a typical job you think of a woman to begin with, but she's a Native American. So I hope she's going to succeed. We'll see how that goes. But yes, we have to work around many, you know, obstacles and bring new ways to tell the story, saying if New York is coming back from horrible economic crisis caused by pandemic, you know, we'll look at this as an option to talk about a restaurant owners who, you know, the restaurant who owned by women, a gym owners, a different, you know, a Broadway talent. There's a lot of women around, and New Yorkers are, you know, very multi-dimensional people, and pretty much everyone has a story to tell. So yeah, there are ways, you know, to sort of make it more diverse in terms of racial and gender profile, but it is up to us. Yeah, we have a lot of work to do.
That's really interesting, Dmitry. Thank you so much. You know, since we're both from Voice of America, we share some of the same background. And the one thing that strikes me about what you're saying is, you know, Voice of America, we're a full service news agency. We really cover a wide variety of topics, but we have a couple of key core focus issues. One of them is women. One of them is telling America's story. So it sounds to me like you're actually finding multiple ways, you know, finding innovative ways to tell women's stories, but also meet other coverage priorities like untold American stories. And that's really fantastic, and it's inspirational. But another inspirational guest we have is Tone in Nigeria. Now, your story is a little bit different, Tone. If I understand this correctly, now please correct me if I'm wrong, but I believe your audience, you're catering to a predominantly female audience, but you're trying to get more men into your listenership. Is that correct? And you're trying to use 50-50 to actually attract more men?
Absolutely. Women Radio is Nigeria's only radio station for women and their families. We are 100% female-centric and unapologetically for women. In a country that is patriarchal, we've been able to use women radio to break the culture of silence by pushing the woman agenda through gender equality and fairness representation of women. And so in 5 years, we've been able to drive the conversation on the importance of bringing women into elective positions, bringing women at the forefront border of decision making. And we've also been able to break that culture barrier by partnering on various programs to enhance and put women on the bright side. And what we have been able to use the 50-50 to do is also to bring the men onto our side, for them to understand the agenda of women, to understand where we're coming from, and get men to start speaking the language of women. And so, yes, that is what we have been able we've been able to bring more men on the side of the conversation, basically. So while we're trying to break the culture of silence, we're also ensuring that we use the Women Radio platform to understand that we are not fighting the men, because men do think women are competing. We're not fighting. We're just trying to say that we need to include women. We need to do what is right for women. We need to also ensure that the men understand the importance of what we're doing, making them understand that we have to work together, and basically getting men on our side, putting them on the table, and to try to understand from the women's perspective. So yes, we're 99.9% programming, but we also bring men in as guests for them to understand what we're doing. So the 50-50 is on the flip side for us, trying to bring men onto the table.
Thank you so much, Tone. And not to state the obvious, but I have to say it is not a coincidence that here today we have 2 female panelists, 1 male panelist, and 1 male moderator. You'll notice it's 50-50 here in today's session, and that's not a coincidence. So we completely understand your point that this really is everyone's initiative. And speaking of everyone's initiative, I have a long list of questions here, but we did advertise this as an interactive panel. So before I will pause for a moment with my questions, and I will ask if we have any questions from the audience. I don't see any right now. Let's see. So there's none in the chat, but if anyone wants to speak up and present a question to our panelists, please feel free. Go ahead and unmute.
Yes, could I ask a question?
Yes, please. State your name and your affiliation, please.
My name is Bosawan. I'm a multimedia journalist in Voice of America Lao Service. So 50-50 project is that also consider the balance of the workplace, like staff and staff like female and male. Do they do that effort, or just a audience or covering, or doesn't matter how many men or even no women in the office is okay, or something like that?
So the 50-50 project itself is really something that's aimed at on-air representation, but actually, let me go back to Nina at BBC, because she's the brains behind the operation. Nina, can you talk a little bit more about why 50-50, why this project overall tends to focus predominantly on the individuals who are featured on air?
Yeah, absolutely. Thank you. Always a good question to be asked. So we look at 50-50 from the audience perspective. And so we want to make sure that our audiences see, hear and feel and read content that reflects them. And that's why 50-50 really comes from that perspective, from a content perspective. However, you're absolutely right. What happens behind a camera, microphone, also has an impact on what we see, hear and read. And 50-50 itself does not specifically focus on changing workforce, but it can have an indirect effect. And one of the things that we have seen, I do the monitoring for the flagship domestic TV bulletins. And what we decided to do was monitor the number of correspondents that we have on our content. We couldn't really control them because we thought, well, they're hired into the workforce, so we can't physically control whether they are or are not part of our content because they are hired for a specific role. But what we've seen over the last couple of years is that there has actually been an increase in women's representation of almost 10% in the last 2 years, because what it's done is it's identified that actually our on-screen presence as the BBC has an impact in terms of the contributors that we are putting in front of our audiences. So it can have that indirect effect. But that's, I talked about at the beginning, we count what we control. And that's what's really crucial with 50/50 is that, we're counting what we control so that we can create change. If we can't change it, then we're not counting it. And I think that's a really important point. So if you in your workforce have that opportunity to create change, please go ahead and do it.
Thank you.
Thank you so much. Thank you for the question. Really appreciate that. I have another question in the chat from my colleague Carol here at Voice of America. Carol asks, what are you doing to incentivize finding more women as speakers? Let me go to you, Gyurcsa. I think you might have a good answer to that one.
Yes, as we noticed very quickly while counting, that as we count 3 groups, we count our own reporters, we count experts, and what we call cases. That's in the reporting. And the most difficult group is, in fact, the experts, certainly on specific matters. So, well, before COVID, we did networking evenings, and then we invited women experts to our organization and showed them around and then brought them in contact with journalists. But that is not possible anymore. We do now web connects. So we select a couple of women experts on a specific topic. We did one on child poverty. We did one on the American elections, which worked very well. So, and then some of our journalists interview those experts, and the whole newsroom can follow this. So we were in fact presenting them with fresh female experts. And when we did also on economics, and that worked also very well. And then afterwards, very soon we see them on air. The good, well, most of them, they come on air, and so that's a way to learn our journalists to learn them to know new female experts. We will do a new one in 2 weeks about climate issues. And that's one of the ways. Also, what we do, we work a little bit proactive. If we see there is a certain topic coming or growing in the news, the small team, the 50/50 goes to look for experts themselves and sends them to the specialists to say, hey, keep in mind that there is also this person about this topic.
Thank you so much, Gyurcsa. That's a fantastic strategy. It's really interesting to see how 50/50 is working at your organization. In today's session, I think we have 4 different media organizations represented. The BBC, Voice of America, VRT, WFM, and we have even more in the audience. So this is really a big initiative. I think I've heard more than 100 organizations have signed up so far, and this is it's an ongoing process that's happening all over the world. But this week we're kind of giving it a little extra push, and this particular session is one of about half a dozen sessions being held this week that our friends in London are calling the Challenge Week. And to kind of come back to the main topic for this particular session, we're calling today's session Making Monitoring Count. And there's a little bit of a double entendre there, a little bit of a double meaning. Part of the 50/50 project is sitting down with a pen and paper and counting, actually saying, oh, I had 1 man in this subject in this report, and 2 men in this report, 3 women in this report. So there's actually a physically counting process. But we want it to mean something. We want it to count, and that's the other meaning in the pun in the title. So let me talk about that first meaning of counting for a little bit, the actual physical act of counting. I'm not going to lie, there's a little bit of paperwork involved in this project, and I think that actually speaks to the meaning, because when was the last time you saw a bunch of people sit down in a webinar excited to talk about something that has paperwork involved? It doesn't happen, and I think that really speaks to the importance of this project and the enthusiasm behind it. So I want to go over to Dimitri now. Dimitri, you started counting with one show, and that show went on hiatus, and now you're introducing the 50-50 counting process to your entire bureau, the Voice of America Russian Bureau in New York. So I want to ask you, the data counting process, the data gathering, the data entry, how do you find it? Let's speak freely. Is it sustainable?
I think it remains to be seen because we just started a few weeks ago, and the way our model function is that reporters actually sends me the data on their numbers every week, and I just collect them and put it all together and calculate the whole volume. There's a little bit of a difference because we produce a lot of content every week. We produce on average 7 to 10 packages per week. There are live shots, there are business news. There's a large volume of what we do, and I think it remains to be seen. We need to see how the progress goes. Obviously, reporters have a lot on their plate. They usually balancing 3 to 4 stories in production, development, post-production simultaneously. And this is something that we're going to have to work on. But yeah, it is in addition to your daily workflow, weekly workflow. It's fascinating to see the results of that workflow. We're just going to have to incorporate this into our day-to-day operations, and we'll see how that goes.
Tone, let me ask you the same question, Tone. How are things going in Nigeria? Are you finding the project sustainable?
I believe that the data gathering and entry are sustainable. One of the things we realized at Women Radio with regards to being part of the 50-50 project is that it actually holds us more accountable. So we're more accountable, we're more being deliberate, that we have to always include women and also look for men who are going to weigh in on the conversations that are female-centric. So while collating the data, we found out that it draws our attention to understanding the dynamics of conversation on radio, and also ensuring that we put our topics in such a way that would encourage more men to be part of it, which gives us the opportunity to have a more broad conversation with regards to having men and women participate on the program. So because of 50-50, when we are coming up with topic ideas, we're always thinking, how would it look when we have men coming in and joining us? So data gathering is one of the things that we look forward to, and it always makes us use of, we've been able to make use of it and look at ways to make our programming better as a radio station, especially in ensuring equal representation of both men and women. So yes, it is sustainable and it's working for us at Women Radio. Yes.
So I mentioned that there's two meanings here. There's when we say making monitoring count, we want to actually count, but we also want to make sure it matters, that this is not just something that lives in a document somewhere, but this is something that that makes a difference. So let me turn to my friend and colleague Geertje Baal at VRT in Belgium, and let me ask you that question. Is it making a difference?
Of course, it's making a difference, and counting is important because it confronts you with reality. It's the clearest picture you get when they see the figures. They think they're doing quite well, and then they see the figures, and it's not so much. It's also the only way to see an evolution in what you're doing if you're really counting. And some things need more encouragement than others. And it is easier, for instance, in a weekly program than in a daily news bulletin, because there is way more output. But it gives you, as I said earlier already, a good indication where the problem lies. And it can be like, we need more women experts, but also we had one team performing very badly. But then we noticed that is a team that consists mainly of men and even older men. But that was also an indication to our management from in that team, we have to change something. And when we have to replace people, we have to take that into account. So it works also in that way.
Thank you so much. So I just want to remind everyone there is a chat function here in Teams where we're hosting this meeting. So if anyone in the audience has any questions, please go ahead and submit them electronically through text in the chat. And I'll pause for some more of those in just a few minutes. You know, I hate to sound like an advertisement, but I can't lie. I really like the 50/50 project, and I'm saying that from my heart, not because I'm here as the presenter, but the fact is, this project it really does mean something. And I think the thing I love about it the most is it's valuable. You know, you can take it at face valuable. It's worth it in and of itself. But even beyond that, it forces us to slow down and do our jobs better. It's all about quality. I think most everyone in our audience is a journalist, and they know that newsrooms are always trying to do more with less, do more, get it first. And this, you know, the 50/50 actually doesn't, it pushes back against that tendency to just do more and do faster. It forces us to, you know, really focus on quality. And I think that's really, really important. It gives us time to add polish, and that's a luxury that we don't always have. So for me, that's the hidden bonus I have found within the 50/50 project. And I'm curious, I want to go around our panelists and ask them if they have found any hidden bonuses within 50/50. Tone, I see you're smiling. Have you found any hidden bonuses? I don't want to put anyone on the spot, so you can certainly pass, but I'm going to go around the room and ask. Tone, any hidden bonuses?
So I will say that one of the things we definitely, I will say it's going well. One of the things we had in 2020 that we didn't have in 2021. I mean, the bonus for me is
we just lost Tone, but don't worry, I'll come right back to her. I'm sure she'll get back in just a moment. But let me ask you, Geertje, that question. Any hidden bonuses at VRT?
Yes, the most important thing is that you give a chance to new voices. As you go looking for women, you go also looking that you find new people, and that gives you more fresh and new and other perspectives. Also, when you often women tend to say, oh, but I'm not a specialist and I'm not like to talk in public and so on. But the more women they see on screen, the less they will become hesitant, and they will say, oh, I can do this as well. So that's two things that we have learned and that we would like to encourage. And you get not only new voices, but as I said, different perspectives, more variation, diversity in perspectives.
Very good. Dimitri, any hidden bonuses in New York?
In every corner, listen, there's a hidden bonus in New York. But yeah, I completely agree with Gretchen. I mean, it makes you think differently. It makes you change the way you think at, you know, the regular story. You know, because when you work for a certain amount of years in the news cycle, everything became sort of a trajectory, like a road, you know, that you run every day. You know, this happens, you find this speaker, this expert, you call so-and-so. But when you think about it, you know, the world is changing. What was 10 years ago, maybe it's not the same as it today. So it does make you, you know, think outside of the box and bring new people and new voices into the news cycle. And I think it's, at the end of the day, it's good for everyone.
So speaking about thinking outside of the box, you know, we're a year into COVID. We've all sat through dozens of webinars. I'm going to try and do something a little different. I'm sure most of you are probably watching at home, but I'm actually in my office today here at VOA in Washington, and I'm going to give you a little tour. I'm going to show you a little bit of a hidden bonus that I found. So come on. So, you know, we have our carefully curated Skype backgrounds. We have our bookshelves and things like that. And here behind me, I have all my toys. I'm a big sports fan. So I have all of my toys from when all of my favorite teams have won championships. Ice hockey championship, American football championship. And, you know, once I started doing the 50/50 project, I'm going to confess something. I realized that when anytime any of my favorite men's teams won a championship, I purchased a hat or a pennant or something like that. But I wasn't doing the same thing when my women's teams won the championships. And, you know, it made me realize, and this is a hidden bonus for me that's shown how 50/50 has creeped into the rest of my life too. So now if you look at my backdrop, over the past year, I have added this ring from when my favorite women's basketball team won the women's basketball championship. this card from when we won the American Football Women's World Cup. Again, it's hidden bonuses is the topic I'm discussing right now. And as I settle back down and put my laptop down to a more conventional Skype shot, let me ask you, Nina. You're the mastermind of this in London. Have you discovered any hidden bonuses?
I love that. That was most fantastic. Thank you so much, Gary, for the tour. And I love the fact it's made you think differently about sport. But yeah, to echo yourself, Herksha, and Dimitri, it is about thinking differently, thinking outside the box. I use this example quite a lot, but I love it so much. BBC Viet, our Vietnamese service, when they started a couple of years ago, they were around 20% women representation. And they were like, oh, we'll never, ever, ever reach 50% women. And they just couldn't work out how they would do it. And I went back to them a few months later to ask them, why are they hitting 70, 80% women representation all of a sudden? And basically their boss told me that we needed to bring it back to 50-50. And that was the reason that I'd gone to speak to them. And I'd expected a few months later to be going to them and trying to get them to reach 50% women. So when I asked them, basically what had happened is that they were starting to come across stories that they'd never thought about or never heard about before, because they started widening their particular networks, widening their pool of contributors. And so all of a sudden they were unveiling all these stories that they had never known about, and they wanted to get those stories on air because they were the best stories. And that's obviously the most important thing with 50-50, that editorial is paramount. So for a while they were up there, 70, 80% women's representation as a result of all these amazing stories that they were finding. And that's the power of thinking differently, because you unveil and uncover the different stories. And I think that that you'll be finding that across all the networks, I hope, that are taking part in 50-50.
So the topic is making monitoring count, and we were our last question was about hidden bonuses, and just as Tone was getting to her hidden bonus, we lost her. So while she comes back online, I see that in Tone's absence, she actually received a comment from a compliment from one of our audience members, Rukun. Apologies if I pronounced that incorrectly, but Rukun says Tone touches on a very good point. 50-50 makes us more accountable. So absolutely, it really does make us more accountable. So Tone, would you like to follow up on that? We lost you, but we heard you start to say something about your hidden bonus, something to do with accountability.
All right. So yes, it made us accountable. It made us also look at other areas we would normally not look at. For instance, we're now having to look at persons with disabilities. We're having to look at younger people that we would normally not look at. But what I was trying to say is that one of the things we had in 2020 that we didn't have in 2021 is a template that we got from 50-50 in 2020, being different from the one in 2021. The one in 2020 was more explicit. It was very broad. We were able to identify every individual that was contributing at different points and what they were contributing on. It was easy to explain to people. Now, the Excel chart that is used in 2020 is something I would like us to go back to, where it had the title of the program, whether it was relating to men or women, the colors, the vox pops. It was very inclusive, and so that was a big point for us. And I'm really hoping that we can kind of tweak the one we're using now. But yes, the 50-50 has made us more accountable, and it's making us to widen the different people we bring on board.
And I think you make a really good point about widening the net and paying attention to the sort of the finer details. That even the templates that we use can ultimately have an impact in how we do our jobs. But 50-50 forces us to be accountable. So on that topic of accountability, I still consider myself a journalist. I know our panelists, you're all journalists as well. I mentioned in my last question that I did not want to sound like an advertisement. Let's be a little bit critical. It's our journalists and it's our job as journalists, not always to pat ourselves on the back or pat authority on the back. It's our job to, push those in positions of power to do better. And I think 50-50 is an effort to do better, but maybe it can be. Maybe it's not the best it can be. So let me go around the room and ask everyone. Let's be a little self-critical. Can 50-50 be better? What can we do to make 50-50 even more successful? Tone, you're nodding right along. I think you've got an answer. I can tell you have something. And before you answer, Tone, I just want to invite our panel, our audience, to please keep submitting questions in the chat. Go ahead, Tone.
So honestly, I was we were very excited to be part of the 50-50. And when I heard BBC spoke about the 50-50, I think it was in Scotland 3 years ago, I thought we have to be part of this. We can do better. And I will be suggesting conversations around physical campaign in Nigeria because our regions differ. Here in Nigeria, in Africa, we're still in an analog switching into a digital age. And there is a lot we can achieve more for physical interaction, going into communities, engaging men and women, which will improve on our data collection. Women rarely talk in Nigeria. The men talk for them. When we do a program on gynecology, for instance, and we all know gynecology is medicine for women, we find the men phoning in on behalf of their wives and on behalf of their daughters. And we're having to say to them, please hand over the microphone to, the phone to your wife to speak or your daughter. The same thing when we go into the communities and we want to reach out to grassroots. We're discussing things like the menstrual cycle of a woman. We're talking about breast cancer, and it is the men that are talking. So for us, physical interaction will do more, going into the communities, engaging the men more and explaining to the men that they need to allow the women to speak will improve on our data collection and not just have resource persons on radio for a community like Nigeria, for instance. So I feel there is a need for us to move the 50-50 project to a physical environment, which would require some resources, which we're happy to work with. So beyond engaging them on radio, we must also look at the impact for people to see it physically for what the 50-50 project can do. I always say that you can't have 4 tires in a car and say you only want to ensure that only 2 of the front tires are working while the other 2 at the back are not working. So we need the men in our communities in Nigeria to understand that women bring a lot more to the table. And when they get more women to talk, then we are really 50-50 in the society. Thank you.
I love it, Tone. I love it. I love the analogy with the 4 tires in the car. In fact, I might I might borrow that, but I'll be sure to credit you. Does any of our other panelists want to weigh in on ways we can do a better job even within the 50-50 project?
Oh,
Nina,
God,
Nina, please.
Yeah, I just want to say that was so inspiring. Thank you. And I remember doing the talk in Glasgow and you quietly giving me your card as you walked out. I was like, oh my gosh, this is amazing. And yeah, thank you for being such a passionate supporter throughout since that moment, and for everything that you're doing in Nigeria. It's absolutely amazing. But in terms of what we can do now, what we do at the BBC, we do have a what we call the BBC New Voices database, and I think Hershey, you've got something similar over at VRT, if I'm correct, where we are literally regularly on social media going, give us your voices, because at the end of the day, we can't, as you were mentioning, Gary, we as journalists, we are always going to be trying to fight against the fact that we have to deliver the news. And so there are times when we can sit back and we can go out and find those voices, but we need to know where they are. And so to do that, we would like as many people as possible to put themselves forward in the first place. And Tone mentioned about the disabled representation. And this is something that we've been focusing on a lot at the BBC of late, especially because we've moved 50-50 monitoring in the UK to include disability and ethnicity monitoring. But we are very much struggling when it comes to disabled experts coming forward and putting themselves forward to talk about everyday subjects such as economics, politics, healthcare, architecture, whatever it may be. And so unless we know you're out there, we can't make that change. And so my plea is that experts themselves put themselves forward. Don't be frightened to be that first voice, because as Hertz was saying, unless we can't be what we can't see. And so we need more people putting themselves forward to be represented on the media. And then hopefully that will see an escalation in that representation that we're looking for across the board.
Fantastic, Nina, and it's interesting that you mentioned expanding beyond monitoring just gender. I've heard that the BBC, you're now building 50/50 as the Equality Project, and in your organization, you're not only counting gender, but you're also counting disability, race. In fact, if I remember correctly, I believe Thursday there's another webinar in this series hosted by a team in Australia. Wednesday, my apologies. Thank you so much. From a team in Australia talking about representation in fields beyond gender. So very, very interesting. I'm going to have to get up early to tune into that one from Washington. So Dimitri, I know you wanted to say something about expansion.
We live in a world that is no longer black and white. I mean, there are tones and half tones and all the shades of gray, and we all know that there are LGBTQ people, transgender people, gender fluid, non-binary people, and they are playing more and more role, bigger and bigger role in our social and, quite frankly, political life. And so the question is, are they included? How do we count them? Are we keeping this 50-50, or is it going to be 49-49 too? There's all sorts of questions that are, need to be answered, because I think we can't just ignore it. The world has changed.
Can I answer that one? Dimitri, I think it's fantastic. Go on.
I'm going to put one final call out for questions in the chat. If anyone in our listeners, if any of our audience members want to ask something to our panel, now is the time, because we're going to be wrapping up pretty soon. But while we wait for our final set of questions from our audience, let's do this. Look, I could go on all day. I know when this meeting ends, I have a lot of notes I'm going to review. I can talk about this project all day, but the one thing I have learned over the past year is that digital fatigue can be a very real thing. So I don't want to hold anyone hostage, but let's take a moment now to collect ourselves, refocus, and just as we prepare to wind down, let's all focus, and let me go around by our panel one by one and ask everyone the one message you want our audience to take away from today's session on making monitoring count. Let me start with you, Geertje.
Yes, I would say that for now, we have to keep reminding our colleagues constantly about thinking about it, because old habits die very slowly. And changes don't come easily. So keep going, keep pushing for it, because one day it will become an automatic thing. But for the moment, we have to still work on it, but keep doing it. It will have a result.
Toon, final words of wisdom to leave for our audience.
So in Nigeria, what I always say is that no team succeeds by fielding only half its potential in any game. So for us to succeed in our journey of progress and change, women must have equal access to opportunities in all areas like their male counterparts. That is the only way we can regain our position in Nigeria in the Committee of Nations. Nigeria is a patriarchal society. We are the only women radio that talks about women all the time. 99% of media in Nigeria is owned by the men, and it is a very patriarchal space. So we will continue to do what we're doing. We're pushing to have a women radio in every state of the 36 states of Nigeria. That way, we will have the voices of women heard. Thank you very much.
Thank you very much, Toon. And Dimitri, words of wisdom?
Numbers never lie. I mean, we can sit and talk day and night about existential, problems of our society and limit to access and, you know, da 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 da. But when you actually see the numbers, it's just undeniable. Like, wow, okay, like we really have to, you know, rethink about it. So we just have to keep, you know, keep counting, and hopefully this will make a change.
Nina, parting words of wisdom from London.
Well, Dimitri stole my line. Keep counting. Absolutely. It might seem simple. It might seem tiny. To some, it might seem really insignificant. But counting every day, as soon as you're making that content and using that data to understand what you're doing right now, identifying the gaps and the change that you can make will help make change in the future. So keep on counting.
That's fantastic, fantastic. Or maybe I should say brilliant, brilliant from our friends over in the United Kingdom. And really, it's been a brilliant panel. Thank you all so very much. Thank you to the BBC for organizing this session and for organizing the 50/50 project. Thank you to all of our panelists, Dimitri Vershinin from Voice of America in New York, Geertje Bal from VRT in Belgium, and Tone Okewale Shonaya from WFM in Nigeria. And most importantly, thank you to our listeners. If you have any questions about the 50/50 project, feel free to reach out to myself here in Washington, to Nina in London, or if your organization is already a 50/50 partner, you may already have someone in-house who can address those questions. So really, I think my parting words of wisdom is to talk about it. We had a very interesting discussion today, and I think really talking is really the answer. The more we discuss these things, the more impact we can all have, the better job we can do as journalists. So thank you all again. Thank you, London. Thank you, panelists, and thank you, audience. Let's do this again sometime. Hopefully, we will all get better, get our vaccines, and maybe next year we can do this in person. But until then, thank you, keep counting, and take care of yourselves and your families. Be well.
Thank you. Bye-bye.